Hello, and welcome to POMA Does, a podcast produced by the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. We provide a voice for osteopathic medicine and share insights on issues important to osteopathic physicians, residents, and students, as well as those who embrace the osteopathic philosophy. POMA's mission is to promote the distinctive philosophy and practice of osteopathic medicine for our patients, our members, and the communities we serve. Thanks for tuning in.
Hi, my name is Dr. Shana Nguyen. I'm a third-year family medicine resident. I'm also chief at Lower Bucks Hospital today, and I have the privilege of interviewing Dr. Christopher Bellettieri today.
Hello, my name is Dr. Chris Bellettieri. I am the program director for the family medicine program at Lower Bucks Hospital in Bristol, Pennsylvania.
So today, for the POMA podcast, we'll be talking about the position of a program director and APD for those who are curious about how to go about pursuing the position and then what it entails as well. So just to start off, Dr. Bellettieri, how did you become a program director?
So I have been in private practice ever since I finished residency, and I was on staff at Lower Bucks Hospital at the time. It's going back about 10 years ago now. They did not have any residencies at all. So I was approached by the administration of the hospital to get involved with creating the residency at first. And then we had our preliminary meeting. It was a very lengthy meeting. I remember towards the end of the meeting, maybe 3 hours in, the CEO at the time said to the group, well, we only have one more question that we need to answer here, and that's who's going to be the program director. And then he looks at me and says, the obvious choice would be Dr. Bellettieri. Yeah, I was not expecting that at all. I thought I was just going to be faculty for the residency program, but gave it some thought and went for it. I had no experience at the time. Originally, our program was AOA approved, and the AOA has a rule that you have to have at least 3 years of graduate medical education, administration experience before you can be a program director. I had none, but the AOA made an exception for me, and here we are.
That's quite a feat, too, to go from no experience to full-on program directors.
Yeah, it was a pretty steep learning curve. I had the benefit of actually doing the application for the program itself, which was very educational because it really taught me, all of the requirements for the program. So that helped for sure.
So, and then for those that don't know, and maybe also for me, what are the responsibilities for a program director? I see you running around all the time, meetings, clinic, patient, but what are the specific responsibilities of a program director?
So it's vast, obviously. It's really just administering the entire residency program from top to bottom, dealing with recruiting, interviewing, hiring residents, and then just, running the program. Obviously, recruiting faculty is huge. Dealing with any kind of problems that may arise happens. Unfortunately, there's not many, but that does happen. It's a very all-encompassing position for sure.
A lot of leadership role.
Absolutely. And not just for the residents themselves, but for the other, GME faculty and administration as well.
And then speaking of your responsibilities, what is a typical day for you like as a program director?
So I am a clinician first and foremost, see patients every day. And I do that side by side with residents. And then sort of interspersed throughout every day are administrative duties, whether that is, currently what we're doing right now is reviewing applications, setting up interviews, forming the interviews. And then I do have one Wednesday I use as an administrative day solely for the residency. There's a lot of paperwork to do and all that, and we try to consolidate it into one day.
I feel like a lot of medicine's a lot of paperwork, right?
There is.
You did mention a couple problems that you do have some problems with your position, even though it's few. What challenges do you happen to face in your position as program director?
So, yeah, problems that arise with residents or other faculty are pretty rare. So that's not really a huge challenge. I'll be honest with you, one of the biggest challenges that we face now is what we're doing right now, what I spoke of in the last question, and that's recruiting. And not just, actively recruiting, but then reviewing the literally thousands of applications that come in for a handful of positions. It's so competitive, and all of the candidates, really, the vast majority of them are qualified for a spot. Literally thousands of applications for a handful of spots. It's extremely challenging to try to, look at paper essentially in someone's record on paper and determine if they would make a good resident. It's very challenging.
Yeah, especially when you're trying to do a holistic review of the applicant, it's hard to determine who or what the president is like in person versus on paper.
Absolutely.
So with all your interviews and your clinic and things like that, how do you manage work-life balance with all the responsibilities that you have?
That's another challenge for sure. It's really, honestly, I found it's about two things, really. One is time management, and the other is trying to be as proactive as possible. I try not to let really anything, I try not to procrastinate. I try to handle things immediately. When something needs to be done, I try to do it right away. Otherwise, things back up and then you just get behind. So staying on top of stuff and doing things promptly is very helpful. And then, time management, trying to multitask. I try to look at all the charts of patients that I'm going to see really in the next week, but I may do that, in the evening. If I'm watching the Phillies game, I can look through charts and get stuff pre-prepped for the next week. So doing some multitasking and time management really helps me to pre-work some of the charts and some of the other things so that I'm better prepared when the day comes.
And then is one of your greatest joys from being a program director?
It's definitely just seeing the residents grow, and not just as doctors, but as people. We've had a lot of families started. I've been to several weddings of residents. Actually, 2 residents that met in our program got married, and I went to their wedding. I just got a text message from them a couple days ago. They're having a baby.
Oh, congrats to them.
Yeah, it's great. We've had babies born to residents in the program during the program. So that's fantastic. And then just, seeing them grow, start families, then ultimately get a job or start a fellowship and move on to the next phase of their careers. It's so incredibly rewarding.
For sure. That does sound like quite a rewarding and great joy that you can have from also teaching and guiding the residents.
Absolutely.
And speaking of residents, I'll segue into the next portion of my questions. When you're choosing the residents, we're in full swing for interview season. They've just opened up the applications. What qualities are you looking for that make the best residents?
So the best quality for any resident, in my opinion, is hard work. Good work ethic. That's number one on my list. And like I was talking about a few minutes ago, it's such a challenge to look at a paper or application and determine if this is a hardworking individual. Sometimes there are clues, in letters of recommendation, for instance, and personal statements, but it's tough to convey that. But that by far, to me, is the most important trait of a successful resident is work ethic. I'm asked that question sometimes during interviews. What are you looking for in a resident? That's always my answer. The analogy I use often is, if I have one individual who's brilliant, perfect board scores, perfect grades, just top of the class, straight A's, but is a lazy person versus somebody who's hardworking, but maybe had one board failure, maybe didn't have the best grades, but they're dedicated. They show up early, they leave late, they get the job done, they take advantage of everything that we have to offer. I would take that second person every time. I'm confident that I can, along with the other faculty, teach anyone to be a good family doctor if they're hardworking. But if somebody's not motivated and doesn't have that work ethic, they're really challenging to teach.
That's true. In medical school, they teach us a lot about the textbooks and the hard facts and things like that, but it's hard to learn the soft skills, and usually you don't learn them until you get into residency, and then, it's hard to build the habit if you don't already have somewhat of a foundation for that.
Great.
So I agree with you on that. So like you said earlier too, there's thousands of applicants. Everybody is qualified. How can a student set them apart from other applicants and make themselves known to program directors or the program?
Sure. That's a great question. And in my experience, the best way to do that is to physically rotate at the program that you're interested in. I know I did that myself. When I was a third-year med student, I knew at least one of the hospitals where I wanted to train, potentially. And I set up many rotations in my third year at that site, got to know many of the attendings, got letters of recommendations from the attendings at that program, from the program director as well. So then when it came time to apply, I was first in line because I had made a good impression with all of these attendings at the site that I wanted to attend. So this is the so-called audition rotation, so to speak. But beware, it's just that. I have had some students rotate with me for a potential audition rotation who did not impress me, and they didn't come to our program. But on the flip side, I've had many that have rotated with us who made great impressions, who otherwise I would probably not have been able to single out. They would have been in those thousands of applicants, but I got to work side by side with these people, and they demonstrated a great work ethic, which is what I'm looking for. So, they moved right on to the top of my list. It's not always feasible, to rotate at every site that you may want to, but I would suggest a med student pick their top one, maybe two sites and get their foot in the door and make an impression early.
I totally agree with you, Dr. B. Being proactive and then just showing your work ethic and your personality is a great way to stand out amongst the rest of the applicants that we have.
Absolutely.
And then for students, how would they know if the program is a right fit for them, especially with all the virtual interviews and things like that and limited audition rotations that they can do?
Yeah, obviously, if you're able to rotate, that would be number one. I would say number two would probably be to do a site visit, even if you can't do a rotation. We do that sometimes. So you could schedule with the coordinator at the program you're interested in just to travel there, just to see the facility, meet the program director, maybe meet some of the residents, see if they're happy. That's always, a huge indicator, obviously, of the success of the program is you talk to the residents themselves. If they're happy, there you go. If they're not, or they're miserable, they're overworked, you know what you're going to get. So those would be, the two best ways. When we do our interviews, I do a group session in the beginning of the interviews with all the candidates, and I try to run down a little bit about our program and what makes it different, just to give them at least a brief flavor of how our program works and how it's a little bit different than others. But really seeing it firsthand for yourself is the best possible option.
And then for those after they finished matching and things like that, how can the residents, once they've come in as PGY1s, have the best experience? How can they make the most of their time here after they've matched?
Sure. So our program in particular is very much about self-learning. We give all of our residents a lot of tools and a lot of opportunities to learn both didactically, but also through clinical experiences. We have a lot of different and interesting rotations, like in aesthetic medicine, for instance. So I always encourage everybody to take advantage of as much as you can that we offer. One of the lines that I always deliver to the interview group and to the incoming classes is that you're all adults. And you're all doctors. And in our program, we treat you as such. So we don't, force feed you and make you do stuff, but we give you all these opportunities. And our most successful residents are the ones that take advantage of as many of those as possible.
I find that true myself. A lot of times, I think taking your advice, if you ask, the worst they can say is no. And if they say yes, you have such a great opportunity to learn more and do more. If you just ask or show interest, I feel like that's the best way, like you said, to get more experience and time with the patients. So going back around full circle, once a resident is in their program and they're about to graduate, or if they've already graduated and they want to become more involved with graduate medical education, become a program director or associate program director, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. I would suggest initially what I did is just be faculty first. Administration is something I was always interested in and something that I probably would have predicted that I got involved in later in my career. It just so happened that I was offered the position earlier and obviously took it. But teach. That's the first thing. Be faculty. That's what I did for 15 years before I was offered the program directorship. I would teach interns, med students, residents in my office all the time. And that's how I became a good candidate to be program director. But, if you're faculty first, then you can always get involved in GME leadership. You can attend GMEC meetings, you can attend didactic sessions, and just get involved with the residency. And then as things progress, if an associate program directorship position opens, you're going to be identified as somebody who's involved already and a good candidate. And then you can move up to program director from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your insight and tips on how it is to be a program director, how you get into the position, and just some tips for students as well. How do they get into residency and stand out? I also appreciate your perspective, and I learned a lot more about you today, Dr. Belisaire. Even though I'm at the program, I feel like I learned a lot about you today. So I just like to thank you for your time and allowing me to interview also today.
Sure thing. My pleasure.
Yeah. And thank you to everyone else who joined us today in the podcast as well.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of POMA Does. Be sure to subscribe to POMA Does wherever you listen to your podcasts. and tell your friends and colleagues to tune in. Learn more about osteopathic medicine and POMA on our webpage, www.poma.org, and join the conversation on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Or email us at poma@poma.org. We'd love to hear from you. Join us next time for another edition of POMA Does.